Open this public hearing of the Standing Committee on Regional Development, Infrastructure and Transport's inquiry into local government sustainability. I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people as traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their ancestors and elders past, present and emerging. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their cultural and spiritual connections to Australia's lands and waters. In accordance with the Committee's resolution of 4 August 2022, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website. I remind any members of the media who may be present or listening on the web of the need to fairly and accurately report the proceedings of the committee. I will just do an introduction of the committee. My name's Luke Gosling. I am the federal member for Darwin and Palmerston, essentially. It's called Solomon, but chair of the committee. Thanks, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, I'm Deputy Chair Tony Passon. I'm the Shadow Assistant Minister for Infrastructure and Transport and the member for Barker.
Scotty Buchholz from Queensland.
Colin Boyce, member for Flynn, Central Queensland.
Tracy Roberts, member for Pearce, Western Australia.
Tony Zappia, member for Macon in South Australia.
So, gentlemen, unfortunately we haven't got a Taswegian on the committee. They're allowed to be. We just haven't been that fortunate at this stage. Can I welcome you as representatives of the Tasmanian Government's Department of Premier and Cabinet to give evidence today, and we'll start by, for the Hansard record, if you can each please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee. That's for those giving evidence. Just in case there's others that aren't getting evidence, there's no requirement for them to do so.
Okay, great. So my name is Matt Healy, or Matthew Healy. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Strategy and Delivery for the Department of Premier and Cabinet. Within that portfolio, we also include the Office of Local Government. So I'll just hand on to Mike.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. Mike Moggridge, Acting Executive Director of Local Government.
Luke Murphy-Gregory, Acting Director of Local Government Reform in the Office of Local Government.
And then behind us, I apologise for the room configuration, but we needed a PowerPoint for a charger on a device.
So I got promoted to the back. Isaac Della Fontana, a Senior Policy Analyst in the Local Government.
So can you just say your name again, mate? I just missed it.
Isaac Della Fontana, Senior Policy Analyst.
Thanks, Isaac. Gentlemen, although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses of Federal Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement. Well, really take as long as you want. We've got some questions for you, but if you can give us an opening statement, it's your opportunity to hit the big points that you want to make, and then we'll proceed to some Q&A and some discussion. Thank you.
Great. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. We genuinely appreciate the ability to put forward our voice, as you said, given that there's no Tasmanian representative on the committee. I think from our perspective, this is a really important opportunity to highlight some of the key issues and concerns that we have, and we certainly hope that the submission that we provided is useful for the committee in considering its terms of reference. So I will try and keep it relatively brief so that we can respond to questions raised. So really, Tasmania's submission includes three primary points, or three main points. Firstly, from Tasmania's perspective, we do support the views of the Australian Local Government Association that the overall quantum of Australian government funding should return to historical norms. We see that the recent increases from the Australian government in terms of increases to Road to Recovery and the Safer Local Roads and Infrastructure program are a great start. But of course, the effect of this announcement is fairly significantly offset by the cessation of the pandemic era Local Roads and Community Infrastructure program. So whilst the announcements are very positive, our view is that they don't quite get us to the point where we're returning the funding to local government in this area to historic levels. Our second key point is that we would like to see opportunities to better align the allocation of general purpose stream funding across states and territories to better reflect the core principles of horizontal fiscal equalisation. Tasmania is a highly dispersed population. In fact, it has the greatest proportion of its population living outside of urban areas. Its topography, its climate, and its need for a greater proportion of sealed road infrastructure means that maintaining road infrastructure in Tasmania is very expensive. I would suggest proportionally more expensive than other states and territories. Now, whilst that is reflected generally in a higher than per capita proportion of road funding to Tasmania, we would argue that current position is not of benefit to Tasmania. That current position is probably a reasonable approach to reflect the significantly higher costs of infrastructure maintenance for this state. What we are generally concerned about, we certainly haven't been pushing this point previously, but now that we have the opportunity to raise this point, we do see that the provision for federal assistance grants under the general purpose category perhaps disadvantages Tasmania in terms of being distributed on a population share. The Tasmanian government is recognised across other fora as having a lower capacity to support the infrastructure and services that we require for this state. To provide a similar level of service and infrastructure that can be provided across all states and territories. And that also goes to our capacity to support our local government in the delivery of services. Now, that's not reflected in the distribution of federal assistance grants across states and territories. So that's the second key point in our submission. Obviously, as I said before, Tasmania hasn't raised that position strongly in the past, and perhaps we're not raising it overly strongly now, but I would like to put it on record to counter any alternate view that Tasmania's increased proportion under the roads portion of federal assistance grants is somehow an unreasonable benefit to Tasmania. So I suppose our core evidence is that if we were to look at the redistribution of federal assistance grants, please don't look at roads and distribution in isolation. And if you are looking at roads distribution, please look at the relative cost of maintaining our road infrastructure in Tasmania compared to other states and territories. Our third main point is really we do support, as an overarching principle, the simplification of transfers to local government, as of course the states support the simplification of transfers to the state. We do believe that decision making is best held at the level that is closest to the people and closest to the delivery of those services. So where possible, we do encourage the provision of untied grants over the fairly administratively heavy tied grants for specific purposes. Can I balance that though with our perspective that if we are to move down that path, perhaps we need to also ensure that there is a greater level of transparency and accountability in terms of the maintenance of infrastructure and the delivery of that funding. We recently completed a Future of Local Government review in Tasmania. One of the key concerns out of that review was the significant inconsistency in the methods and the assumptions that go into the maintenance of assets at local government level. That was the focus of the review. I'm not suggesting that concern doesn't extend to other areas, but for local government we have 29. And across all of those 29, there is an enormous divergence in assumptions in terms of asset lives and strategies and approaches that go into the maintenance of assets. So if we are to improve overall the provision of infrastructure through local government and through the funding of local government, we would certainly welcome efforts to improve the consistency and maturity of asset management capabilities within that area. They're probably the main points that we've made in our submission and that I wanted to highlight to you today. I'm more than happy to open up for any questions.
Great. Thanks very much. No, good. With that Future of Local Government review, found that Tasmanian Council service obligations have expanded to meet increasingly complex community expectations. Can you just give us some examples of those expanded service delivery items and those funding implications? But more broadly, also out of those 29, and it goes to, how do you define financial sustainability? Out of those 29, how many do you think aren't financially sustainable at the moment?
Well, if I can go to the first question first, I think this is a really important issue, probably for all levels of government, including local government. There is an increasingly complex set of demands placed on us all. And we all battle to try to provide services at a standard that is accepted by our communities within often fairly constrained fiscal environments. The challenge for local government, and this is a real challenge for local government, is that they often find themselves as the service deliverer of last resort. So where there is a market failure, for example, in the provision of GP services, you often find that local government come in to subsidise those services. A similar case appears for childcare services. Many councils in Tasmania provide childcare services. Some, up until recently, I'm not sure if anyone still do, were providing aged care facilities or accommodation for elderly within their communities. Now, those rightfully should be either regulated, they should be provided by the private sector, or they sit under regulatory frameworks that are owned by either the Commonwealth or the state government. So I think it is a reasonable concern of local government that at times their local community expectations drive them to deliver services that they should otherwise not deliver. The Future of Local Government review said completely recognised that difficult imperative on local government. The view that it took was, whilst it understands that at times local government may step in to be the provider of last resort, there should always be a focus on what is the pathway out of them delivering that role. Frankly, local government shouldn't be providing GP services. They shouldn't be providing childcare services. They shouldn't need to. There should be some mechanism by which all levels of government can work together to resolve market failures or to find alternate solutions to providing those services that is not or that doesn't end in ratepayers providing a disproportionate of cost for services delivered through their rates. So that was the first question.
And then just around how you define financial sustainability and how you don't have to name them, obviously, but out of the 29, how many do you think?
Well, can I say the first issue is the problem is the term sustainability, because frankly, you can be sustainable at a really poor level of service if that's what you choose to do. So every council, I suspect, could say that they are sustainable. They have a very secure and stable revenue base. They have significant freedoms, in Tasmania more so than some other states, to raise revenue by increasing their rates base. And they have a lot of freedoms in terms of determining the level of service that they provide, obviously with the constraints of community expectation. But we in Tasmania will find councils at very different levels of service in terms of what they provide to their communities. We have very small councils that actually believe that they are providing everything that their community would like them to provide. But when you look at the suite of services that they provide, it is far less or far less mature than the services that would be provided by some other areas of the state. So our first challenge, and it's probably the challenge that was faced by the Future of Local Government review and frankly nearly every review that we've done of the sustainability of small councils, is that it is very difficult to compare apples to apples across local government areas. And now it probably goes to the previous point I made about asset management methodologies. If I can speak very frankly, you can make your financial position look better by pushing out your assumed life of your assets. So some councils may have one asset where they're assuming reasonably that it has a 20-year life cycle or a 20-year life. Other councils will actually look at that same asset and give it a 50, 60, 70 or 80-year life. The effect of that is it reduces your depreciation costs, which makes your books look better.
Yeah.
So until we can resolve the issue of how we compare the performance of councils, we can't actually answer your question, which is, can they sustainably deliver services at that reasonably expected level? And that's our biggest problem.
Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. A few questions, gentlemen. Firstly, thank you for acknowledging that notwithstanding the uptick in roads to recovery, which at this stage has gone from 500 to 650 million, the loss of LRCI means that local government is in fact still behind the 8 ball. I want to just ask you, we've heard a lot of evidence about cost shifting. You're probably not surprised that we've heard this.
Yeah.
I think I'm fairly surmising that evidence when I suggest to you that state jurisdictions cop more of the blame than the federal government for this phenomenon. Gentlemen, what core funding does the Tasmanian state government provide to local government? Core funding, not competitive grants, core funding.
No, we don't provide core funding to local government.
Do you accept the notion that there are obligations, because local government is a product of state governments around the country, there's a tendency for roles, responsibilities, requirements to be pushed down to local government from state jurisdictions?
So no, I don't accept that without qualification. I do accept that the roles of councils are becoming increasingly complex, but I do, in the most part, with the exception of some of the service providers of last resort issues that I talked about previously. My suggestion is that the general trend of increasing cost in the regulatory environment for local government reflects the broader ongoing complexity of the regulatory environment for us all. So land use planning is a good example. There are growing expectations around the sophistication around the assessments of development applications. Our planning schemes, our policies that sit around our planning schemes are increasingly focused on things like coastal erosion and the increased resilience of our communities from the impacts of climate change. Now, they do impose additional costs on councils. There's no doubt about that, and many would characterise that as us devolving and pushing responsibilities onto local government. But I would suggest that actually it's about the increasing cost of their delivery of their core functions. And look, we do accept, and I suppose our view is, in terms of the delivery of those core services, local government is very free in terms of its capacity to generate revenue. In fact, it's probably got one of the most efficient revenue bases of all three levels of government. In fact, if you look at most reviews, they would suggest that we should raise more money from such efficient tax bases such as you see with the land-based taxes of rates.
Can I go to your submission around competitive versus core funding grants?
Yeah.
Do you accept that the concept of competitive federalism is an important one, and in particular to this point, do you accept that there needs to be a degree of competition between councils to ensure that we're rewarding good performance?
Yeah.
And equally, where funding is coming from Canberra for a stated aim, that we can use it, we can use directed or tied grants in that way. I mean, ultimately, if everything's core funding, then, for example, and I'm sure this wouldn't happen in the sensible burgers of Tasmania, but no money might get spent on roads, and everything might get spent on social capital projects. If you follow my drift.
Do I think that local government could be more accountable for the services that they deliver? Yes. Do I think that if we move, as I said before, if we to move to fully flexible funding arrangements, then absolutely we should be better able to measure the outcomes that they're delivering for their communities. And even in the Future of Local Government review, we said that councils need to be more accountable to their ratepayers in terms of the decisions that they're making, in terms of whether or not they're spending money on social capital or infrastructure or services or environmental management. We absolutely agree that there should be greater transparency for that. Probably the term that perhaps I would like to use less is the competitive grants program. If we could move to a performance-based program where we're investing in those things that are delivering really good outcomes, and we can demonstrate that they're delivering good outcomes, I think that would be a great place to be.
I think we might be splitting hairs about some terminology there. You'd hope the grant assessment process does that. I'd love to ask you questions about the 30% minimum grant, or maybe some other colleagues might, that has come up consistently from particularly low councils that are challenged. I'm conscious of the time, but I did want to. There was a point I really wanted to make, and I think I might have lost it in the translation. Just on that, it comes out of the back of what you just said, and it might be an unfair question, but you're talking about transparency. Obviously, you'd be aware of the AAA's push for greater levels of data collection and distribution to the federal government. I don't know where the Tasmanian government stands on that push, but I presume, given your submission, you'd be open to a very open conversation where data is collected on a standard. I'm talking road infrastructure now, on a standard platform. It's published openly so that we can ensure decisions are made driven by the data and perhaps less by the political science of the day?
Yeah, look, I don't know if I can have a position on that specific proposal.
I did say it might be unfair. If you can't, just say you can't.
But I am happy to say that the Future of Local Government review, the direction that this government is taking, is very much about increased accountability, but in a constructive sense. So I think there is merit and there is benefit for local government to understand how they're performing objectively against other areas of local government. So if it's the big stick, we're going to sit on high and judge your performance, I think that can become problematic. But if we can empower communities to understand how their council is performing compared to surrounding councils, then we absolutely would support that. And frankly, that goes to the initial question, where if we could deliver on that result, we may be able to have a better discussion with communities about which councils are truly sustainable in delivering services that communities should reasonably expect.
So can I take it from that, the final question / comment, can I take it from that you would support a program of benchmarking?
We have previously been seeking to work with our colleagues in the Commonwealth and other jurisdictions on standardised indicators that we could be using nationally, whether they're used to benchmark or just as a resource of information. Again, we're probably splitting hairs there, but benchmarking comes with a whole bunch of really sort of
it's the same concept. Let's call it that.
Yeah.
Yep. Fair. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. Mr. Passon? Sorry, Mr. Zapier.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your submission to the committee. Just one question. Earlier on, we heard that it costs more to maintain roads in Tasmania. Could you please explain why that is?
So we have, for a whole bunch of reasons. One, we have a highly dispersed population in Tasmania. I think out of Australia, and I certainly don't want to compete with, for example, Western Australia in terms of the kilometrage that you have to travel from one end of the state to the other. But the proportion of our population that lives outside of urban areas is the greatest, is higher than any other state and territory. But because of its fairly even distribution, or relatively even distribution across urban and non-urban areas, we have a very high proportion, or we have a requirement for a very high proportion of our roads to be sealed, which generates a higher maintenance cost for us. And that's exacerbated by the fact that we have fairly mountainous terrains and we have a very wet and a climate that is particularly harsh on the maintenance of our roads. So the environment in Tasmania, all of those together, we contend we actually have a relatively high cost of the maintenance of our road infrastructure.
So if I could understand your question better, have you done a comparison with, say, the cost per kilometre of repairing a road in the regional and remote parts of Australia as compared to Tasmania?
I don't know if we've done that specific comparison. We have done the comparison as a statewide network of roads and how they compare.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tony. We'll go to Mr. Buchholz.
Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen, for your submission. Two conversations I'd like to have with you. One, in your submission, you speak about the potential of the reduction of the 30% minimum grant participant for those shires that have the capacity, or those cities or recipients of the federal assistance grants that have got the capacity to raise other funds where smaller regional shires might be slightly more disadvantaged. Do you just want to expand on that, please?
Look, so I think our submission says that we certainly open to exploring the reduction in the minimum grant, particularly where it does improve the equitable distribution of funding across councils. We'd need to just understand that a little bit more carefully to make sure that it is a responsible step to take. I suppose our overall suggestion is that if we look at the distribution of grants, we should look at both the equitable distribution of funding between jurisdictions and the equitable distribution and the methodology for funding it within the jurisdictions across councils.
Yep.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the two are connected. I've just, do you have, and I know it's a federal government requirement, but if changes were going to be made and amendments into the future, I'm interested in your thoughts or your opinion as to what an alternative model or methodology may look like. How do you recut the pie? Because no one ever wants to give up the coin.
No, that's right. Yeah. And look, and I was being fairly frank earlier on to say that we haven't pushed hard on the issue of the distribution of these grants. I suppose the weighting of our submission is more in the defence of the current arrangements, and that if you want to open them up, then let's open them all up and let's open both sides up properly and look at the appropriate distribution. So we're a little concerned that there was a narrow lens being placed on this issue to say that we should redistribute roads funding because of the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events and the like. We're saying, well, if you take a too narrow focus on this issue, then you may not actually be getting the full story, and you may not be treating the overall distribution of funding to local governments reasonably across the nation. I think that's our main point.
Do you accept the concept that if the federal government has a fixed rule that sets a minimum 30%, that doesn't allow for changing circumstances where, for example, we've got 2 mega cities in this country and large councils within them with gargantuan capacity to raise revenue? I mean, I've got councils who would survive on a 15th of the car park fines that the City of Melbourne collects, right? So do you accept that as a concept that it might need some reconsideration, and that fixed floor price, if you like, might not be serving equitable purposes?
Coming from a state who I think is totally... Sorry,
gentlemen, before you go on to answer that question and think about your answer, can I just resolve, because unfortunately myself as chair, but also the deputy chair, have some commitments and we have to leave, and I just will quickly resolve that Mr Zappia becomes the acting...
I'm happy to second that.
Chair, and seconded by Mr Passon, the deputy chair. Thanks. So he'll take you through to the end, and there's a bit that he'll say at the end just to close out the proceedings. Really appreciate your evidence today, and sorry I had to pop off and do some media.
Well, you've got Helen here. Do you want to deal with that? Minutes?
At the end we'll look after those minutes. But thanks for the mention, Scotty. Can I just point out that we're in Lonnie, was it last week or the week before?
Week before. So we got some good evidence up there. Really glad you could join us today. We do apologise for not making it to Launceston. It was right in the middle of our budget estimates week, so we were in front of our Parliament down here. No, not at all. That's why we wanted to have a yarn with you today. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Mr Zappia to chair the remainder of the meeting. Thank you, Tony. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. So I was probably a little facetiously going to compare Tasmania's budget to the budget of some of the larger councils.
The Brisbane City Council has a larger budget than the South Australian budget. So
So I certainly understand your point, and we do appreciate that perhaps the 30% minimum is not equitable in all circumstances. I'd just like to consider it properly, because there is a degree to which a floor may reflect perhaps the inability to really capture all of the costs.
In the interest of time, the concession that it's something worth considering is all I was looking for. Thank you.
Great.
And Chair, the second part of my question went to a number of consistent evidence that came from councils around the methodology of depreciation, particularly, and I appreciate your opening comments around different shires adopting a different staggered approach to depreciation. But I thought the heartfelt concerns from councils where they had received, the consistent message was a small shire, small rates base, they receive a large chunk of money from a grant from either you or I, or in partnership, and if they depreciate that at the written rule, in some instances it was a large percentage of their entire rates-based revenue, and the reality that they said to us was it was near impossible for the shire to replace or match the depreciation, and that came through not once but quite regularly in the evidence that we received. And have you heard the same concerns, and is there a way forward there to offer assistance to councils?
Absolutely, I completely agree. The concern, an increasingly concern of councils to be able to withstand the popular view of large capital grants that might go into, for example, the building of a swimming pool or the building of a new community centre. It's a very simple message to highlight the value of that capital injection into a community. It's a much harder message to turn to the community and say, you do realise that our rates need to go up by 3% just to maintain and to depreciate. Well, both to maintain the asset, and depreciation is part of that cost as well. So I certainly appreciate that concern of councils, and that maybe there needs to be a couple of things. One, some focus on the real cost of capital grants to local government and some greater visibility of what those costs are. I think there needs to be some capacity to recognise that for some local governments, some assets they never intend to replace. So they may not rebuild a pool without external capital grants to rebuild that pool. So the question and the ask of us has been, can we please depreciate that to a zero value so that we're not having to reserve cash that we're never going to contribute into that asset? So I think that's a real issue. But the bigger issue, and probably an issue that sits alongside of that, is that the maturity level of councils in some areas is too low to be able to set up a long-term asset management arrangement so that they're evening out their asset obligations over 20 or 30 years. So councils do face this situation where they've got large lumps of asset that they need to replace over years that they can't afford, whereas if they had taken a 20 or 30 year view, they could probably have evened that out and made it affordable for their communities. So, yes, appreciate the problem, but there's a bigger problem in making sure that councils are mature in their capabilities to manage assets over a longer period of time.
Thank you, Chair. And
Thank you.
Go into the chamber.
Helen, did you have any questions?
I do. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Oh, no, we're not quite to midday, so good morning. I'm sorry I haven't been here for all of your evidence, but I've read your submission. And I just, on that last point around local governments being mature enough to look at such things as a 30-year view, that takes me to workforce. And in your submission, you went to workforce. And the capabilities of our local governments is something that we've heard quite a bit about throughout this inquiry. I'd just ask that you might expand on that, where you think there are serious workforce challenges and what suggestions you may have to address that.
So can I just open up very quickly I talk about maturity and I talk about capability, but I want to stress that this is not a criticism of local government because, frankly, some of our councils have organisations that are so small that you couldn't possibly expect them to maintain that capability or that maturity. So this is not a capability or maturity that is for want of trying from local government, but I think in some areas they're just not simply able to meet those expectations. And really where the Future of Local Government review went was let's genuinely acknowledge that limitation for some councils, and let's find solutions to bring that capability in from external sources to make sure that their communities are getting the same level of services as communities in larger councils. That can be through shared services. It could be, when we are a supporter of voluntary amalgamations where it suits. But we're also really big fans of councils working together to pool their resources so that they can attract professional services more effectively. And we have at times also toyed with whether or not there should be, if you have councils that are truly and necessarily small, then maybe we should be looking at whether or not they have the same regulatory burden as some of the larger councils. And I talk in this instance like, for example, King Island and Flinders Island. I don't think there would ever be a circumstances where they are part of a larger council. It's been looked at many times. They are very proud communities in their own right, and they probably want and deserve their own administrative capability. They will need, however, always to import some of these more mature capabilities from somewhere else, and we should help them to do it.
Thank you. That's a fulsome answer, and that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're just about out of time. Tracy, did you have anything that you want to
My questions have already been answered.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Chair. But I would like to say thank you to the team. A great submission and great answer to the questions.
Right. Thank you.
Just before we wrap up, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you want to bring to the committee's attention?
Oh, look, no, I think we've made our key points clear in our opening statement, and I think we can just rest on that and rest on the submission that these guys put together. So, thank the team for all their work in trying to respond to your terms of reference.
Well, once again, thank you for your attendance here today. And if you've been asked, I don't think you have, but if you've been asked to provide any additional information, if you could do so by the 25th of October, that would be appreciated. You will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to the committee. If you feel that you need to make any adjustments or amendments to that, please feel free to do so. And again, just send that back to the committee. With that, once again, thank you for both your submission and for appearing today. And I now close this public hearing.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.